The show you're about to hear was recorded before the latest phase of the Russian government's war against Ukraine began on the 24th of February 2022. Dear listener, as creator of this show, I want you to know that I stand in solidarity with Ukraine and with Russians who oppose Putin and his accomplices. There are many ways, financial or otherwise, that you can support the people of Ukraine, but I'd like to highlight Cook for Ukraine, an initiative launched by previous guest on this show, Alyssa Timoshkina, together with her friend and fellow chef, Olya Hercules. Cook for Ukraine is raising funds for UNICEF UK's Ukraine Appeal, which is providing life-saving food and medical supplies to families who've been forced to flee. To find out more and to donate, please visit cookforukraine.org.
Tatiana, hear me.
Вот скажи мне, американец, в чем сила?
А вы что, собираетесь на ней жениться?
Да.
Ух, красота-то какая, лепота.
Таможня дает добро.
И вообще не называй меня, пожалуйста, Вероникой. Кто я? Вот кто я?
Отныне русской земле единый быть.
Don't torture me, I can't live without him.
Hi, my name's Ali, and this is the Russophils Unite podcast, where we watch Russian films and films with a Russian connection. As always, I am joined by a guest, and today my guest is Jenny Shelton. Hi, Jenny.
Hello.
So glad to have you back once again.
It's a pleasure to be back. Yeah, great stuff, and very nice to catch up with you.
Yeah, do you know what? You're joining quite a rarefied group of Russophils Unite guests. We've had quite a few people on for 2 episodes, but very few people have been on for 3. So you're kind of like the elite guest, veteran now.
Thanks ever so much. I prefer elite to veteran. Let's go with that.
Yeah, no, now that I say it...
Although you did remind me how long we've known each other recently, and that was a little bit scary.
Yes, well, that wasn't my fault, that was Facebook. I mean, I could have just ignored it, but, like, you know... Yeah, like, it's, getting on for half our lifetime ago.
Wow. Oh, wow, gosh, yeah. That is scary.
Yep.
Oh well, moving on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a long time. Anyway, yes. So, for listeners who haven't caught your previous appearances, Jenny, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I work for the RSPB. I work in a team that is kind of something you've probably not heard of much. It investigates wild bird crime. So this is people who are unfortunately breaking the law and killing birds of prey. So this is often happening on grouse moors and sometimes on pheasant shoots down south. But yeah, it's mostly a sort of uplands issue, and it tends to be where there's a conflict of interest there between people who are managing these landscapes for game bird shooting and then, of course, birds of prey being predators. That's what they do. They prey on stuff, and unfortunately, yes, they are being killed. And we try and, well, I don't. My colleagues run around trying to uncover these people, and I then tell the stories and try and sort of explain to the world that this is happening, with the view of hopefully trying to change that and create some sort of movements in the right direction.
Awesome. Yeah, so since the last time we spoke on this podcast, you'd done some other podcasting in connection with the day job. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I was on the Natural History Museum's Wild Crimes podcast, talking about bird of prey persecution. And it was really good, actually. I have to say, it's one of the things where you really realise podcasts are the way forward, because it was one of the best interviews I've been able to do, because you get to really go into detail and sort of chat, and like you do on a podcast, and that actually lends itself really well to be able to talk in depth about this quite sort of nuanced issue. And the hosts were great. They asked them really good questions, because there's lots of sort of thorny issues about it, and the cultural sort of element of it, and what the solutions are, and how we can take it forward. And yeah, it was really interesting, actually. So yeah, I talked to them about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, being a podcast, we're going to be biased and say, yes, indeed, podcasts are the way forward, and well done, listener, for tuning in or downloading, because tuning in is very old school, old format. But yeah, no, it's a very good point, because the fact that you have so much more flexibility in terms of the format to play with, whereas if you're a more traditional like radio show or TV show, then it's kind of like, well, this is a 3-minute segment, so that you're going to get like a 2-sentence soundbite.
Exactly.
So also, I was interested to ask what your experience was like being on there, because your background, for listeners who this is the first time you've heard Jenny, you were a journalist by trade. So what's it like to be the other side of the microphone?
Oh, that's a really good question. And it's, well, how I would describe it is just as terrifying. So when I used to interview people, I would go into a little room, I'd do loads of prep beforehand, researching generally kind of D-list, if I was lucky, celebrities that were coming to do a panto at the Corn Exchange or something, and mostly
you have to be nice. You have to be nice, Jenny. You never know; they might be tuning in.
Yeah, I was going to say they were in the most part charming and lovely and great, and always delighted to talk to you, even though they were doing the rounds, talking to everyone in 10-minute slots. And yeah, it was really scary talking to these quite sort of professionals. They and I was just this little random journalist, sort of trying not to sound like a fool, asking them probably really obvious questions. But it was good, actually. It's one of those things, once you get started, it was really fun. I really enjoyed talking to them. And then, yeah, doing it on the other end, I kind of made me think, I wonder if they were nervous as well. Because certainly, again, if you're being interviewed, you've got to do lots of prep, and you've got to make sure you've got all the right phrases in front of you, and prepare for questions that people might ask that are a bit tricky. And yeah, so even if it's a subject you know about and you can talk behind legs off, you've still got to kind of do all that prep. So yeah, to start with, scary, and then when you get going, it's fun.
Yeah, so speaking of interviewing people and asking obvious questions, which I'm sure you never did, because you're a class act. But the funny thing about being in the general kind of interested in films is when you get the super A-list directors and film stars who've been around the block a long time, but still they're not powerful enough to get out of doing the interview round.
Yeah.
And so they so visibly hate being there. And then but sometimes that's more fun, because then they'll say something like that's really kind of out of left field, and then it's an interesting news story.
Like, if they don't really care.
Yeah, because they're just like, well, like I don't have to play my cards close to my chest and be diplomatic. I don't know how much thought goes into it, whether they're just like, oh, well, if I cause enough problems, they'll not wheel me out again.
Yeah, maybe. The only person I remember who really didn't care was Rupert Everett. He was doing an Oscar Wilde play, and he just couldn't be arsed. I think he was ill, actually. I don't think he was firing on all cylinders, and in fact, yes, he did say when we sort of first connected, and I'm like, hi, I'm Jenny Shelton from the Cambridge News. He's like, oh, hello, I'm not very well, I'm afraid, I'm in bed. I was like, oh, terribly sorry, and he just couldn't be bothered. Like, I kept asking the questions, he was like, well, yeah, I guess. And, you expect him to be really kind of, what's the word? Because he is quite a wordsmith in a lot of these plays and show and sort of films.
Sort of effervescent.
That's the word, exactly. But he was totally the opposite, and I got away from the interview just thinking, I have no material here.
Oh no!
No anecdote. And I actually ended up, I got in touch with this PR rep and just kind of said, I think I've caught him on a bad day. And I sent her the questions, and I'm pretty much sure she just filled them in for me.
Awesome. Well,
but that's fine, you get the answers in the end.
Got there in the end. Funnily enough, speaking of Rupert Everett, this is a total tangent, but one of the films I haven't covered yet on this podcast, but I might do at some point in, several years when I get around to it. It was pretty early in his career. It was like early to mid-90s. Rupert Everett was in a film by the Soviet director Sergei Bondarchuk, I think it was his last film, which was an adaptation of Quiet Flows the Don. But apparently for years and years, nobody saw the film because it was essentially stuck in kind of post-production hell, and then due to rights issues or something. It's a convoluted story, and maybe I'll just re-record this whole bit. But, there is, oddly enough, a connection between Rupert Everett and one of the, most famous of Soviet directors. And,
oh, wow.
As I say, this was, I guess, I think he died in, 2000, so this was, 6 years before he died. But, yeah, you just kind of realise when you're a director, you just, as long as you're successful, you can just kind of go on and on.
Yeah.
There's just, there
well,
you
maybe
go.
Maybe I'll call up Rupert Everett's people and see if I can get him on the pod. Remember me?
So that's a bit about you. On the first episode you were ever on, we talked about Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears. That was very early in the life of the show, second episode we ever released. And then we had you back on to discuss a period drama because you Okay, so this is not how it happened, but I'm going to pretend that what happened was that you said you would only come back if I let you talk about a period drama.
I said that with my eyes, yeah.
You did say that with your eyes, yeah.
I do love a period drama.
That. Yeah. So that is a good episode as well. I think you liked that film as well.
Yeah, it was good.
I seem to remember.
We had loads to say about it. I'm sure it was Ralph Fiennes, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Ralph Fiennes, directed by his sister.
Yes, that's right. It's a bit of a family affair, yeah. Oh, I can on a random tangent here. I've been in the same room in the Houses of Parliament as his brother Jake Fiennes. So there you go. There's another link.
Okay, interesting.
That was in a debate about grouse shooting. Sorry, which I recorded in order to kind of put it online as a bit of a podcast, although the RSPB hasn't quite done podcast yet, but I'm hoping they do. But yeah, he was talking about, I think he's a landowner, but a good one. And he looked like someone from the Malfoy family in Harry Potter, is the only way I can describe him.
Well, I mean, I guess that's in keeping with family tradition as well, with
exactly
with Rafe being Voldemort. So.
Yeah. Oh, it's all connecting.
Indeed.
Sorry, as you were.
Speaking of connections then, so obviously with Russia having this massive canon of classic literature, finding a period drama was not too hard. So connecting with that area of your interests, pretty elementary. But today we're talking about your day job. Yes. Essentially.
Eagle.
We're talking Yes. Yeah, we're having a raptor-tastic episode.
Nice. If someone kills the bird, I'll be finding out why and who's to blame and all this sort of stuff. So my eyes are peeled for any wrongdoings. I'm hoping, my fingers are crossed for this eagle. But it's not looking good from the trailer. It's not looking good.
No, the trailer possibly possibly alerts the viewer to what might happen, but we'll officially say no spoilers here.
Yes. Well, I haven't seen it. I don't know. I'm just, going on what the trailer seemed to suggest, but we shall see. It's hooked me. It's made me interested and intrigued, which I guess is what a trailer should do.
Exactly. So, should I tell you a little bit about this film then?
Yes, please.
So beyond the trailer, so it's directed by Eduard Novikov, and it was released in 2018. And it won an award. It won the main prize at the Moscow International Film Festival, which is the I think it's the Golden St. George is the award there, because St. George, as well as being patron saint of England, is also patron saint of Moscow. So
I knew he had a few other little patronages elsewhere. I didn't know it was Moscow as well. That's interesting.
Yes, so like when you see like on various coats of arms of Moscow, you'll often see like him on his steed and stabbing a dragon. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure he's also the you'll probably end up cutting this bit as well, but I'm pretty sure he's also the patron saint of syphilis. Or is that one of those urban myths? St. George.
Maybe we'll have to look into that. So this film is a little bit different from the other films we've covered so far on this podcast, in that, well, we've covered English language adaptations of Russian things, so that's one thing. Most of the films we've covered are in Russian. This one is not. This one is in the Yakut language. So Siberia, being a big place, it's more complicated than just Siberia. There's different regions within it, and one of the sub-regions of Siberia is the Sakha Republic, which is also known as Yakutia. So if you ever played Risk as a kid, you might know Yakutsk as being like one of the many territories in Asia that is on the board. I think I might get rid of that.
I didn't play Risk. I was an Age of Empires girl.
Okay, interesting. Age of Empires 1 or Age of Empires 2?
Oh, I think it was at least 2.
Yeah, that was the one that I kind of grew up on. That was like the medieval one.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think there was anything that ever went out as far as Siberia.
No. But I don't know much about the history of there, or in fact the geography of any of there, so it's interesting to hear a bit more about it.
Sure. Well, that brings me on to a bit of a sort of segue about how Yakutia comes to be in the Russian orbit. So in the 17th century, so a little bit before Oliver Cromwell and Charles I in England, but kind of roughly contemporaneous to that, the Russian state based out of Moscow is expanding to the east, and they set up across Siberia these kind of like fort outposts and basically use those as kind of springboards to conquer territory. So around that time, what's now the Sakha Republic kind of comes into the Russian orbit, and the indigenous people are essentially like forced into the nascent Russian Empire, and they are essentially forced to pay tribute, like in the form of pelts, because a book I read to prepare for this episode, because I was thinking I know almost nothing about this part of Russia and Russian history, was Jeffrey Hoskin's excellent book, Russia and the Russians. And in that, he compares what happened with fur in the 17th century in Siberia as being kind of like the fur equivalent of the California gold rush. It was like a whole bunch of people who were kind of like had an eye for the main chance, were like, I'm going to go out to Siberia and get lots of furs because that will make me very rich. And some people got incredibly wealthy off it. Other people did not. And
And the animals didn't do so well out of it, though.
Animals did not do so well. And also the various indigenous people of the region, including the Yakut people, were basically like forced to kind of pay up a certain like number of pelts in order to, as sort of like tribute. My historical knowledge of this is not super deep, and I should also put the usual caveat: when any British person is talking about imperialism, you know, glass houses and not throwing stones apply. So
yeah, indeed.
Russian imperialism is bad. British imperialism is bad. Imperialism in general, we are not fans of in this podcast.
Indeed.
But
awareness
important
raising
context.
is good.
Exactly. So this film is not set in the 17th century. It is set much more recently. It's set 90 years ago. So this is about 10 years, give or take, after the Reds, the communist side, won in the Russian Civil War. Stalin has consolidated power at the top of the Soviet pyramid. And while in the revolutionary period and before the revolution, the communists were like self-determination and like the nationalities within the Russian Empire, you should all be allowed to do your own thing. Well, you know, they've kind of changed their tune now that they are in power. Like there's sort of like this nominal, you get to do what you want, but as long as the thing that you want is to be part of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
So it's one of like, you have lots of choice, by which I mean you have one.
Yeah.
So again, grossly oversimplifying. One doesn't come to this podcast for super accurate history, but this is kind of a sketch of what's happening. So this is the historical context, and it's out in Yakutia. So it's way away from the center, and it focuses on an elderly couple who are from that neck of the woods. And beyond that, I won't say anything else. We'll get onto the film. One thing I feel like we should also say, though, before we kick off, is that films from this part of Russia are quite a new phenomenon. It's really a post-Soviet thing, because it was part of like the Russian bit of the Soviet Union. They didn't have their own film studio, so like the subdivisions of the Soviet Union that were at the level like what were called Union republics, places that are now independent states like Ukraine and Georgia and Armenia. They had either one national studio each or like several, if in the case of Ukraine. But because Sakha or Yakutia was a level below that, they didn't like quote unquote like merit like their own film studio. So it's really a very new phenomenon. And what's super interesting about the films that have come out is that it seems like it's been very much led in terms of the storylines from the indigenous Yakut people who make up.
Cool.
I think, yeah, they make up about 50% of the population of that republic within the Russian Federation. So yeah, I'm so excited to be covering one of these on the show. The reason I got to see it is that the film streaming service in the UK and the US called Klassiki did a season of Sakha films towards the end of last year, curated by Maria Sibiryakova, who is from that part of the world originally, but she is now based in one of the universities in London. So she put that short season of films together, and that's how I ended up seeing it. And when I saw it, well, to be honest, when I saw the trailer, I was just like, I am definitely going to have Jenny on to talk about this one. So yeah, definitely worth exploring beyond this film, the other films from that part of the world. And I would highly recommend that people check out Katie Davis's article in the Calvert Journal about the film industry in Yakutia. The article's called "Freeze Frame: How the Arctic Republic of Yakutia Forged Its Own Indigenous Film Industry." It's a really fascinating article. So that's the film we're watching. That's a little bit of historical context, as much as I can provide it. But so I think we should launch into the film itself. So at this point in proceedings, then, we have a traditional thing that we say, and that thing is "Поехали," which essentially means "off we go." And it's a big deal, as it's the thing that Yuri Gagarin said when he was blasting off to explore a new frontier. And I guess that's sort of what we're doing here. Oh man, that was such a cheesy link.
I love
Never mind. It's probably staying in. Okay, so without further ado then, 3, 2, 1. Поехали! This episode of Russophiles Unite is brought to you with support from Klassiki. Klasky is a streaming service specialising in films from Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. At the time of recording, the film we're talking about on this episode, Eduard Novikov's The Lord Eagle, is available exclusively on Klassiki. With Klassiki, you get access to a permanent library of classic movies from the silent era to today, alongside recent award-winning or crowd-pleasing contemporary films chosen by the Klassiki team as Pick of the Week. The service is ad-free, and each film features newly produced English subtitles and specially commissioned programme notes. Klassiki members will also get exclusive access to a video interview with The Lord Eagle's director, Eduard Novikov. I am a huge fan of Klassiki and delighted to recommend it to you. It's available to listeners in the UK and the US at klassiki.online. That's KLASSIKI.online. You'll find links to the film and an interview with its stars, Zoya Popova and Stepan Petrov, in the show notes for this episode, which we'll also be sharing on the Russophiles Unite social media feeds. Back, Jenny, Shelton, and I have just discussed The Lord Eagle, or to give it its Yakut title, wish me luck, Toyon Kiil, and it's in Russian, it is Tsar Ptitsa, directed by Eduard Novikov. So, before we tell you what we thought of the film, we're going to go over to Jenny for a sketch of the plot. So, if you haven't watched the film yet, prepare for the potential of spoilers. So if you don't want it spoiled, this is the time to pause and go away and watch it. Okay, spoiler warning issued. Over to you, Jenny. What happens in The Lord Eagle?
Okay, so The Lord Eagle, to me, was a film about old age, about changing times, about survival, existence even, and sort of man's interaction with nature. So it began in a very desolate, bleak-looking, snow-covered wilderness, and there was an elderly couple.
Bleak, desolate? You'd describe it as that? No, you're absolutely right.
It
very
looked
remote,
barely habitable. I mean, in its own way, very beautiful and stark. But yes, they were sort of on the edge of survival. It seemed this elderly couple in this sort of hut. And it could have been kind of any point in time. I know that it was the 30s, but it looked like it could have been any time, sort of 100, 200 years previous to that, potentially. And they were sort of discussing food and fuel and the sort of things that they would need through the winter. And they are visited all of a sudden by this eagle which appears outside their hut. And they're initially fearful of it, and they wonder what it wants and why it's here and what it's doing and what it means. And so they're quite sort of sceptical and fearful of it. And they get this shaman in to do a dance and talk about, well, what this eagle wants. And he sort of, I suppose, communicates with the bird, and he tells them that the eagle has returned. It's been sent because humans have been unkind to animals, and the animals have complained about the humans. So this eagle has been sent, and it wants a sacrifice. So they then sacrifice a cow and feed the liver to the eagle. And so the eagle is obviously like, great, I'm going to stick around. I'm getting fed. So it stays in the winter.
Which they are absolutely thrilled about.
Yeah, they're like, oh no, it even comes in their house at one point. And I love the way it ran along the floor. They've got a really funny run, eagles. But anyway, it sort of lurks about and it sort of eyes them up with its beady eyes, and it takes the meat that they feed it, and they're all the while kind of discussing it and, why is it here? What does it want? But it also comes out that they did remember destroying its nest. When the old man was young, he remembers destroying an eagle's nest, and he's regretful of that now. And then it also comes out that they had lost at least a child or children themselves. And then, they kind of get to know the eagle, and then it brings them a fox. And that's the sort of turning point when it brings them this Arctic fox, and they realise, oh wow, it's kind of bringing us a gift to say thank you for feeding it throughout the winter. So they kind of befriend the eagle, and I think they've quite sort of come around to having it around. And all the while they kind of bump into some soldiers every now and again when they sort of go into the woods, or there's people coming from the village. There's obviously a settlement nearby. And, near the end of the film, some of the soldiers come in and they're talking about the new sort of Soviet regime that's coming in and what this is going to mean for them. And they sort of feed them and chat. And then they go outside and you hear this crack of a gun, and the woman sort of looks aghast, and you think, oh no, I know what's happened here. And then they go out, and one of the soldiers is outside, and he says, oh, I noticed this eagle. I've got rid of it for you. It was hanging around. And they've shot it, and the old man and the old woman are devastated, and they sort of wrap it and bury it, and are genuinely really, really devastated that this eagle has been killed, just when they sort of realised it was a benevolent bird. And it was to me a kind of bit of a commentary on sort of man's interaction with nature potentially. But what are your reflections after that? Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. The only thing I would have said is that the interactions with the two Komsomol members, who are the members of the young communist, the soldier guys, that's a bit more spread through the film. So they kind of they show up periodically and just kind of mess things up. But no, that was a great summary. Thank you, Jen.
He also, at one point when they meet sort of in the middle of the film, actually, there's a bit of foreshadowing where the guy has his gun there and shows what a good shot he is. And you think, this could definitely be an option if, this eagle might end up meeting this death, because we see what a crack shot the old man is. It's not him that does it in the end, but...
No.
Yeah.
Well, and at one point he's so fed up with the eagle kind of lurking around and being this portentous thing that's literally staring down on them, that he's just right, I'm getting rid of it, and he has it in his sights, and we've seen that he's a crack shot, and you're sure he's going to kill it, except he's not, because it's only halfway through the runtime.
Yeah, he can't bring himself to do it.
No, he decides for whatever reason that it's not the right thing, and that's, I guess, the beginning of the turning point. Although, for most of the runtime, they really don't like the bird.
No, they're really scary and sort of sceptical of it. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, understandably, because even if you don't have any particular religious beliefs tied up with it, it's a massive predator.
Yeah.
And at one point they talk about like, oh, we're going to have to like, I think it's like we're going to have to water the cows indoors just because we don't want to leave them alone with it. Not that it can't carry a cow off or anything, but they're just a bit like, there's not a lot of food around. What if it decides to like, you know, take an eye out of the... They don't, again, they never specifically say that, but they're just generally worried by this thing.
Yes, they're wary of it and sort of suspicious of it. And there is this sense that it's like an angel of death, perhaps, or some sort of, portentous thing that's been sent from, I don't know, above or something. I mean, the other thing which, for me, was very relevant, actually, watching this film with you, was the fact that this actually coincided with a big story, certainly big in the conservation world, about an eagle. And I wonder if I can talk a bit about that now. Sure, of course. Yeah, so what did we miss? So a news story came out. It was from Dorset, saying that 2 white-tailed eagles had been found dead in Dorset, and the police were investigating this with the RSPB. And this sort of started off a chain of reactions, and one of them being an MP called Chris Loader in Dorset tweeted saying, oh, police shouldn't be investigating and shouldn't be wasting resources investigating the death of this bird. Dorset is not the place for white-tailed eagles. So there was this huge pile-on, because these were actually birds from a reintroduction project, which has had lots of sort of time and effort and money been sort of spent trying to bring these birds back. You know, they would have originally been flying all over the country, and they unfortunately got persecuted out of existence. Yeah. Because now you say it, I remember you saying, and the key word here is reintroduced. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, these birds sort of should be there, and they're part of a healthy kind of ecosystem, having a top predator, but people are very wary of them. And it was so interesting to me to see in the film that sort of fear of birds of prey and predators and sort of maybe even nature, if you don't know about it. I mean, the fear is with eagles, people think that it's going to carry off their lambs and it's going to be somehow damaging to their way of life, you know, often sort of farming potentially. The reality is actually they don't eat live lambs, or very rarely. I mean, the fact that they're called sea eagles, white-tailed sea eagles, they mostly eat fish, and, you know, they might take a dead lamb or some sort of carrion perhaps, but they're certainly not a big threat to livestock. But certainly there is that sort of embedded fear, I think, of a huge predator, which I suppose is understandable, but certainly not a reason to sort of illegally kill it, because they are protected, and technically, if you're found to have shot one, you could go to jail. So yeah, this whole sort of Twitter storm erupted, and lots of people responded to this MP saying, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You know, first of all, who are you to be saying what the police investigate and what they don't investigate? And we love seeing birds of prey, and we started a sort of Twitter hashtag on Monday. We had this sort of emergency meeting at the RSPB, and we decided that we would sort of get people to show their support for birds of prey, and it was really fantastic. We got all sorts of people sharing photos and drawings saying birds of prey are welcome in whatever county they lived in. And it's been in some of the papers as well, something in the Times, and it's sort of taken on a bit of a life of its own, but it's really sort of started that discussion about eagles and predators. And I know people get very sort of funny about lynx and, you know, even wolves and stuff. And, you know, I've been to India where people live alongside leopards, and, you know, it's not ideal, but, you know, they don't have a choice. And we are quite sanitised in this country, certainly in England. We're not used to there being other predators. You know, we've been for so long the top dog, we've sort of forgotten what it's like to share with other predators. So, they're sort of the reaction of these two this elderly couple, to me was quite interesting, and I think it does speak of this fear that people have of the unknown in nature, and sort of the worry that it's going to do it means them some harm. But luckily they did sort of the resolution, I should say, was that actually this bird was benevolent and it didn't mean them harm. But then unfortunately, there were the soldiers at the end who didn't really even think twice about just murdering it, and that was the end of it. And that sort of sadness at the loss of the eagle was really felt, and I think a lot of people share that when
when that happens in real life today.
Yeah, that funeral scene at the end of the film is incredibly poignant, I thought. And you're quite right. The killing of the bird at the end, it's not a malicious act particularly, and it's not like deliberately cruel. It's just like the definition of thoughtless. Like, it doesn't occur to them to ask, "Oh, do you want us to take care of this bird?"
Yeah.
They're literally just like, "Oh, this seems to be a problem." Kapow, and it's dead, it's kind of symbolic of the Soviet regime, and to be honest, all imperialistic or sort of paternalistic regimes that are basically like, we know what's best for you, so we're just gonna do it, and you're just gonna have to live with the consequences.
Yeah,
because I thought the way that, even though they're like not in the film very much, the two young communists their role in the story is to kind of explore the interaction between the established and the long existing traditions and this new regime that's basically just decided we're in charge and we know what's best.
Yes, because they say something like, you shouldn't have cows in the same place that they are, they've got to be moved to a different shed or something like that. Like, quite sort of dictating how they live kind of thing.
Yeah, and on sort of one side of the coin, there's a sort of a benevolent intent behind that. They're kind of concerned about people's health and they want to make conditions more sanitary, but at the same time, they're just kind of ordering people around and just like going, this is how it's going to be. There's no interest in kind of like governing by consent. Oh man, I'm sounding like such a bleeding heart liberal, but at the same time, it's just like they're just kind of clomping around and just like acting like they own the place, which is kind of ironic for an ideology that's kind of like, oh, everything is public and everyone is sharing, and it's just like, yeah, but you're in charge though, aren't you? But actually, I think I'm kind of portraying the way the film portrays them as being like very straight down the line, but the film is way more subtle than I'm kind of making it out to be. Like it sort of allows you to draw those conclusions rather than just going like, the communists are the villains, like they end up being, but it's not because they're like deliberately evil. It's because they're just like arrogant and misguided. Which,
what did you you'll know more than me about when she sort of, sometimes she would put the picture of the icon up and light a candle by it, and then she would take it down if she knew they were coming round.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So pretty much all the way through the Soviet Union, there was very much like atheism is the official like religious policy of the state, and so we're not interested in allowing religions to do their own thing.
Okay.
As the decades went on, their attitude kind of like softened and was a bit more like, okay, fine, if you have to, but we're going to make life difficult for you, and we're going to like say that you're stupid and ignorant and like encourage people to mock you, but we're going to allow you to just kind of do your own thing. But pre-World War II, really, there was very much a more active like, no, we're going to like persecute you out of existence. So I think they were probably like this is where I really don't know the history. They're probably less heavy-handed with religions that they didn't see as being particularly a threat. But certainly with the Orthodox Church that was essentially the state religion of the Tsarist regime, they were much more kind of like, nah, this town is not big enough for the two of us, so guess who's going? So yeah, I think that's why you have the woman, her name was Opus, at least in the credits. Like, she was very much like, okay, I'm gonna keep this in the drawer. I might put it up some of the time, but if I'm worried that they might come round, I'm gonna make sure that it's away.
Yes, that was quite an interesting symbol of the transition period they were perhaps in, because they were still very much of the old way, but maybe starting to move into the new way, and certainly the new way was starting to impose itself on them. So yeah, it was interesting, that kind of flipping up and down of that iconography sort of portrait of that was, yeah, seemed to be representative perhaps of that transition period perhaps.
Yeah, one thing that's really worth saying is that the film depicts syncretism in beliefs really interestingly.
Okay.
That's something that's really quite common across history, is having two sets of like religious belief systems that like on paper shouldn't really overlap, but they're overlapping anyway. So on the one hand, this couple are, her to more extent than him, like practicing Orthodox Christians. They have like they celebrate Christmas, and they have the icon. But on the other hand, the husband performs like a ceremony to like a fire deity, and he kind of like consults, like he says a prayer to the fire deity.
Yeah.
Because I think I can't remember exactly what he was asking. I think he was basically like asking for protection, and of course they also have the shaman come in.
Yeah.
Which again is not something that you would normally associate as like part of Orthodox Christianity, but the two things kind of coexist.
Yes, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Of the empire. So it's or the old like Russian Empire. So that's super interesting. And one thing I thought was really ambiguous was when the shaman is like performing the ceremony and dancing, and he's got like this elaborate kind of costume that he's wearing that is very rattly and very noisy. Opus is looking around very nervously, and I was kind of like, is this because she's nervous because like the shaman is essentially like inviting the presence of a deity or the divine, which is like an inherently kind of scary thing to do? Or is she just worried that he is making a racket, and if the Komsomol guys come round, they're going to be like, what's going on here?
Oh yes, that's an interesting play of the superstition versus the very practical, which was actually a few times that comes into play. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and she does have, like, because they have a little bit of a sort of religious conversation with she does with the two Komsomol guys when they come round. Like, this film, it's quite bleak and it's quite harsh, but there are kind of like, there's like subtle kind of like wry humour in there.
Yes, definitely. I was going to say that.
Like the scene where the two Komsomol guys come around and basically invite themselves in for tea, kind of like on a pretext that they're telling her like the latest kind of decrees from the government, which they are there to do, but they're also there to kind of be waited on, which is kind of funny. And yeah, so they're basically like having her wait on them, but at the same time they're telling her, you now have equal rights, and your husband, he can't boss you around anymore. And and at the same time, they're essentially like expecting her to wait on them just because, like,
and perform a very female role and
exactly.
Wait on them.
Yeah. So that made me chuckle.
Yeah, there was some good humour. I think, it does seem very sort of bleak when we describe it, but right at the start, I kind of chuckled because the interplay between the older couple was at times quite humorous, and it was probably similar, the sort of thing that you would get between a couple of that age at any time, in any place, a couple who have lived together for a long time, and they were quite sort of the way they spoke to each other, and their dialogue was actually quite funny. I think at one point he sort of said, "Oh, have you heard any news lately?" And it's like, clearly there's been no news. They live in the middle of nowhere. It's not like there's much going on, but like the way they kind of, I don't know, quite brusque with each other perhaps. It's just, I don't know, it's quite charming in a way, quite sort of endearing.
Oh yeah. It's like grade A bickering.
Yeah.
And there's one point where she goes out of the hut and she doesn't have like one like layer of shawl over,
and he's like,
and
why
he basically
are you dressed like a young girl or something? What are you doing going out like this?
Why are you running around half naked? And it's like, she's like got one less shawl on.
Yeah.
But it's out of concern, but he just expresses it in such a like crotchety old man way.
Yeah, and she equally is very kind of like, you almost expect her to sort of like roll her eyes at the camera at the things he does and things like that. It's quite sweet.
Yeah. And she calls him old man like the whole way through the film. Like, yeah, which is pretty funny.
But then it's sad when he falls ill towards the end, and again that sort of practicality kicks in where he's going, well, what are you going to do without me? You know, that sounds like, you know, what someone might say tongue-in-cheek nowadays, but their situation is so dire almost that, you know, without him, actually she probably would struggle to survive and to manage the cows and do everything herself, because it's quite sort of physical work that they have to do, and they're clearly quite elderly.
Yes, yeah, and she's possibly slightly more frail than he is, but yeah, they're both like pushing 70. And yeah, they're clearly very, very, as you say, dependent on each other. And yeah, that scene is absolutely heartbreaking because he's just discussing essentially like, these are your options. You could go and live with, you know, this relative of mine, or you could seek out your relatives that you haven't seen for ages. And like, because he's basically worried about, he's just like, don't even think about trying to stay here by yourself, because you won't last. And it's really heartbreaking. Like a lot in this film. Like it's so worth watching, but it's a heavy film.
Yeah. But it's not long, it's not a slog.
No, it's actually one of the things I was going to ask you is that as somebody who is a writer of fiction yourself and a English lit grad, what were your thoughts on the storytelling?
Oh, good question. I think it was good. It had a good sort of set up well. Here's the situation. And then the arrival of the eagle would be described as the initiating incident, which is the thing that sort of comes to then stir up and change the sort of status quo, the established sort of situation that we've now been shown. It builds a lot of tension, and you go through the development of the situation quite well, from them sort of wondering what the eagle's there for, and then sort of it will drop hints about what's happened in the past, and you'll learn a bit more gradually about this couple. For instance, the fact that they've lost a child, and the fact that he'd been and sort of destroyed a nest in his youth. And there are some flashbacks, aren't they, to that sort of like ribbons on a string and stuff like that. But yeah, it sort of drips a few bits more information as the plot goes along, and then it does build to that turning point of them coming to accept the eagle, and then the sort of sudden twist at the end, or perhaps not a twist, but that resolution at the end of the eagle unfortunately being shot. So yeah, I thought it's a good structure, definitely, and I think it works really well.
Yeah, it's really economical, both in terms of like, it's not dialogue heavy. There's quite a lot of scenes where it's mostly told visually, but you kind of get enough with the conversations, and the conversations are like very significant, but at the same time it doesn't feel like there's big exposition dumps. As you were saying, like it kind of like drip feeds you like more information, and you kind of like slowly build up a picture.
It actually seems like all of it fits together, the sort of the setting and the tone, and the fact, you say sort of being economical with the dialogue. It wouldn't sit well if it was a very sort of desolate and quiet wilderness, but it was this huge sort of like sweeping, very sort of dramatic kind of like sensational type story or way of filming. Like the style of filming and the style of telling the story seems to fit very well to the setting and the themes and the subject. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. You could say it's like a very quiet sort of meditative film almost.
Yeah.
Like it's
the atmosphere is good. I think they work and create that appropriate, I think, feeling atmosphere.
Yeah, like it sort of simmers along.
Yeah.
And it kind of gradually creates its effect, rather than just being like, bam, pay attention to me.
Yeah. And the themes are interesting. I think it's worth it you can pick up on things. And I mean, everyone will surely read something different into it. Of course, I come at it from this rather bizarre place of knowing all about people killing birds of prey. So yeah, to me it was resonant in that sort of sense, but other people I'm sure would read other things into it, which is a mark of a good film, I think, if you can take lots of things away from it.
Yeah, and certainly like leaving it open enough for people to draw their own conclusions as well.
Yeah,
I think is something that that definitely I admire, rather than just being like, no, this is the lesson.
Yeah,
I mean, that can be fine. That can be fine. You can do that very well. But I feel like that works better with short films than than feature length. But this, as I say, like 80 minutes is a brilliant runtime for a film. Like, if you can tell your story in 80 minutes, that's great.
Yeah.
Because, so many films are like 2 hours and a half. And
oh, God, so many now are sort of 3, aren't they? Some of the ones that come out now, all the blockbusters and what have you. You rarely see one that's less than 2.5 or 3 hours. And who's got that amount of time to sit still?
Well, quite. Yeah. Especially like of an evening during the week. It's like, look, I'm getting old. I need to be up and at work in the morning tomorrow. So
9:30 is my bedtime. So
oh man, I just move me into my hut in Siberia and just like. Yeah, no, I'm being silly, but I think I haven't really asked you. We've touched on like the raptor persecution element. I wanted to go a bit more specifically though, and you'll hate it if I call you like a raptor expert.
Oh, I'm definitely not. No,
you spend a lot of time with people who are very, very knowledgeable about these birds. So, in terms of stuff you've kind of picked up over the years, what did that allow you to spot that might have passed me and other kind of like more sort of lay people to the raptor world by,
yeah, nice. You know? That's a good question. So
it's a very it's not the most succinctly worded question, but yeah,
that's okay. Of course, I hadn't even thought to say that it's a golden eagle. So we do get those in Scotland. I've actually never seen one, but I'm going to Scotland soon, so I hope that I will. Potentially a juvenile. When I showed it to my partner, who is more up on his bird ID skills, he saw the trailer and went, oh, well, it looks like a jovie. That's the technical term. A jovie. Because it still had a few white feathers in it. So golden eagles are sort of brown with a slightly golden head, but mostly just look golden brown all over. And we were remarking about how it sounded so sort of chick-like. You know, it had a real chattering call. I mean, an eagle you think is going to be, you know, this really commanding lord and king of the birds, and it sounds like...
Yeah. It is really incongruous. It's kind of like squeak, and you're just like, really? I imagined something like much more throaty.
Yeah.
That makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, but it's just this peeping noise.
Yeah, it sounds really silly coming from a bird like that. So, I think, what else can I say about it? I mean, I think that's the main thing. It was behaving probably as an eagle would, really, looking for food, basically, and scavenging and... I mean, golden eagles will catch live prey as well, but it wouldn't, if that's, it definitely wouldn't come into someone's house. But then maybe it isn't an eagle, maybe it is some sort of spirit bird or sort of strange kind of, I don't know.
Yeah. I guess you can say, the film, it doesn't kind of spell it out either way. It basically kind of allows you to interpret it as you want to. I mean, it's clearly a physical bird because you see like them bury it at the end.
Yes,
you know?
Yes, and the other people see it, because originally I wondered if only they could see it, but then of course the other guys that come in obviously see it as well. But the fact I was also going to add about how they sort of, the bird almost in a way brings out their deepest fears and regrets perhaps in life, and it kind of seems to initiate this self-reflection, and they sort of project their fears onto it, and I think that was quite an interesting tool to use.
Oh yeah, because so much of the film is about how people interpret their past, because they're just debating backwards and forwards, like. And they're saying, I don't even remember this happening. Like, what happened? And when the shaman says you destroyed destroyed their nest. What it turns out the actual memory is that eventually kind of like resurfaces in Mikipa, who's the husband. He remembers startling an eagle that was carrying like a large stick in flight.
Right.
And he remembers startling it somehow, and then it dropped the stick.
Yeah.
So he kind of like extrapolates from that maybe because the bird lost this stick, it wasn't able to build as good a nest as it would have done otherwise, and that kind of had a knock-on effect.
Yeah, which is kind of based on only his fear. It's not actually necessarily the truth, but he obviously had that guilt that may have happened because of him. And likewise, I think at one point, again, a sort of slightly droll kind of comment, he sort of says, the bird is mocking us for being old, based on nothing. You know, obviously birds don't mock. They don't have any sort of awareness of how old a person is, but that says more about him, that he obviously is aware of his age. And so he's then projecting it onto the bird. I thought that was quite interesting. Yeah,
absolutely. It's just about how, humans interpret the world around us and kind of project things onto it.
Yeah.
But by the end, the fact that the eagle does bring them these like apparent gifts does seem like very sort of anthropomorphic.
Yes, it was a bit,
yeah, which kind of lends itself more towards there's something kind of more supernatural going on with this creature. Because obviously you can train birds of prey to do stuff for you, but this bird seems to do it of its own volition.
Well, I was looking out to see whether it was a falconer's bird, because obviously they've used a real eagle in the film, and talking about sort of training it to do stuff. So something I often look for is whether it has jesses on its legs.
Oh, okay.
So that's the thing that would attach it to a glove, sort of when it lands on you.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that's a sign that it's a falconer's bird. And I noticed a few times it was the camera angle was such that you could maybe only see one of its legs or couldn't properly see its legs. And I thought, I wonder if that's how they've got it to come and fly to a certain point. And, it was obviously quite well trained to be able to do certain things. So I'd be interested to see a making of, actually, how they actually did that with the bird, or whether it was several birds, because it probably was.
Yeah. I mean, this makes me want to, because I've never seen the film Kess.
Oh, yeah. Proper Yorkshire film.
I was going to say, your neck of the woods.
It's really depressing. I think I watched it when I was sort of at that sort of stage in my teens where I was sort of trying to improve myself and read lots of the classic literature and watch all the classic films. And I borrowed it from a friend, and God, it was depressing. And it's very sort of old fashioned. I mean, I guess it is a classic and stuff, but I haven't rewatched it, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, that's Ken Loach. That's his stock in trade.
Yeah.
It's the absolutely bleak, but I was just trying to think of other bird of prey films, because there's such like cinematic creatures. They do really lend themselves to the big screen because they're so incredible and majestic.
It did have such a presence about it, and the way it looked, it had such a sort of awareness behind its eyes. It seemed they do have this sentience, this sort of intelligence that you can almost see. Again, I mean, that might just be anthropomorphizing it, but it's things like eagles and some of the larger, elephants and apes and stuff. They sometimes do look like they've got a bit more going on behind the eyes.
Yeah. And just how imposing it is, like when you see it on the tree next to the house, it's just like, it's huge. It's kind of like, it almost looks like, how is that tree just not falling over with this giant bird on it, I mean, especially...
It did look pretty massive.
Yeah.
I mean, in real life, what usually happens is when you see a bird in the wild, people overestimate the size of it.
Oh, okay.
So we'll often get reports of like, we saw this bird of prey and it was 6 feet long and the wingspan, and it turns out it's a buzzard, which are actually probably about the same size as a crow. They're not massive, but they always look bigger, and you always want to think they're bigger.
Yeah, well, and especially if they've got their wings at full stretch.
Yeah.
They're quite imposing.
Yeah, an eagle. I'm trying to think. A golden eagle's probably about the size of like a Canada goose or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and those are big so-and-sos.
They're quite fat. I mean, it's not as fat as a goose.
No, it's more like straight up and tall. But yeah, seeing a Canada goose perched in a tree like that would be very funny. But
yeah, the film would have a completely different tone, wouldn't it, if it was just a duck sat in the tree?
Now I want to make a comedy about a solitary Canada goose that has like no friends, so decides to make friends with some humans.
Oh,
and chaos ensues.
Yeah. Talking of films with eagles, I mean, to bring the tone into a totally different direction, did you ever watch The Rescuers Down Under?
I did, but probably haven't seen it since I was 5 or 6.
No. Well, we used to watch it, you know, back in the day when you only had like 2 videos or whatever, so you always like rewatch them.
Yeah.
We had that, which was probably taped off the telly at Christmas, and we would just watch it all the time. And I remember they had a boy in Australia who would ride on a golden eagle.
Okay.
I mean, that just seemed to me like the most amazing thing and, you know, life goal. But then I realised actually they're not quite that big.
No.
But that's a great film with an eagle in it.
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got the Deus Ex, whatever the Latin is for eagles in Lord of the Rings. They turn up at the end.
Oh, yeah. And everyone always goes, oh, there's a plot hole. Why didn't they just use the eagles in the first place to fly them there? It would have been such a quicker...
Yeah, exactly.
Traipsing all across the different lands.
Oh, we're going to get tweeted at.
Oh, no, yeah. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, I was going to say, mentioning the tree, the film's actually based on a short story by a Yakut author called, I've written it down, Vasily Yakovlev, and the title of the short story is The Larch Tree That Grew Old With Me.
Oh, yes.
So presumably that tree next to the house, like I want to call it a hut, but although it's quite basic, it's still incredibly robust.
Yes. It looked like one of these Earth ships that Carrie was talking about, actually.
Yeah. It kind of looks the combination of like an Earth ship and some kind of like pre-modern like military bunker. Yeah, very sturdy. So that was kind of funny how we were talking about the whole, you know, trying to live more with the grain of nature rather than just being like, nope, we're going to conquer you and just get out the way. Because that seems to be a lot of the kind of subtext of this film is essentially trying to go with the grain of things rather than fighting against it. And the Soviet Komsomol guys kind of like represent the attitude of like, nope, nature is just here for us to do whatever we feel like with it.
Yeah, or just in the way, or just a nuisance.
Yeah,
which still happens now, you know.
Well, quite with the raptor persecution in this country. I guess that's.
I mean, even like, yeah, go on.
Just the absolute opposite end of the political spectrum is the like raptor persecution in this country now versus as it's depicted in the film.
Indeed, yeah.
There you go. Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
Maybe, I mean, it to me sort of reminded me that people do form a really close connection with nature, and actually, you know, if something does come into your garden or something like that, you can actually get that real pleasure from it. And that was a kind of nice, more optimistic kind of take home from it, the sort of reminder that whenever you do get to know a creature, I mean, we had a hedgehog in our garden, for instance, over the summer, and it was fantastic knowing that it was sort of eating the food that we'd put out for it, and it was sort of coexisting with us, was a really sort of special, joyful kind of thought. And, you know, even just feeding blue tits in your garden, it's obviously not an eagle, but you get that similar sense of connection with the wild, which is so mysterious and so remote and sort of almost magical. And then so whenever it does come and interact with your own humble life, it does feel quite special.
Yeah, I think part of it maybe is just it's something that is, I guess, that connects us with humanity going all the way back, is that we haven't always had the same technology, but, you know, animals have changed over the millennia, as have we, but the pace of change is so much slower than the pace of change of our technology. So you know, being in a field with some I don't know, some sheep or some cows and stuff, or like you say, in a garden with a hedgehog, it's just like somebody 200 years ago could have been having a very kind of similar experience.
Yeah, we've always lived alongside birds. There's a really good book, if anyone is interested in birds, in the listenership, by Simon Barnes, and I think it's called The Meaning of Birds, and it's basically talking about why we're fascinated by them. And it's really lovely, actually. The writing is beautiful, but also the thoughts that he has and the sort of subjects he talks about are incredible. And it's basically talking about how, you know, potentially we may have, as humans, learnt to speak and to sing because we were hearing birds singing around us. You know, and that's an amazing thought. And that kind of, lots of these things that do connect us back through time, you know, they've always been there. And in our daily lives, I mean, actually bumping into a hedgehog's fairly rare, but most of us live our lives seeing a bird every day, whether it's a pigeon or a Canada goose or whatever it might be, maybe something more interesting. They're always around, and in nature they are the one thing that I think we see and have maybe connected with the most in a way. And similarly to us, they're also creatures of sight and sound, whereas mammals go a lot by their smell. Yeah, I think sometimes we have maybe more in common with them than we think, and that can perhaps explain some of our sort of fascination with them and connection, perhaps.
Yeah, because in some ways they seem so other, you know. Whereas mammals, you can sort with some of them, the bigger ones, you can kind of see, okay, I can see how like in terms of some of the behaviours, you can go, oh yeah, there's a flicker of recognition here. But there's something about birds that's so other and different, and even the way they move sometimes just kind of reminds me of like clockwork.
Yes, totally. We had a wren in the garden, and it just, honestly, it was so like a clockwork is exactly the way to describe it. The staccato, jolty movements of it as it sort of beetles away at the base of a shrub looking for insects, and it just looks like someone's wound up a little mechanical toy and then set it off. Yeah. Fantastic.
But those observations about like how they kind of share the vocal powers and the fact that they, as you say, creatures of sight that observe things and rely on those senses. I guess I've never really thought about it that way before.
But they can do the one thing we dream of is flight. I think that's the other sort of mystical thing they have, isn't it?
Yeah, and even when we achieved that, we just do it in so much more of a humdrum way because, you know,
Well, I can give you a good fact here about peregrines are actually responsible. So peregrine falcon is the fastest bird in the world, and there's a certain type of fighter jet which is modelled on a peregrine's shape.
Oh, really?
And the sort of the way it pulls air through its nostrils or something it was replicated when they were engineering this type of really, really fast jet.
Huh.
So we're constantly inspired by them, even in that kind of way.
That's so interesting.
I feel like I've really preached heavily about birds. I do apologise.
Well, I mean, it is a film called The Lord Eagle. Actually, I don't know what the literal translation of the Yakut name of the film, Toyon Kiyil, is, but the Russian title, Tsar Ptitsa, literally means Tsar bird.
Oh, okay. That was something else I was going to ask you about. So when I went to Russia, I remember them always talking about the doppel-headed eagle.
Right.
And what is that?
So that is, like, it was basically the Tsarist imperial symbol. Because...
Right. And it was an eagle with two heads, basically.
Yeah. And this was something that I spotted this time, I totally missed the first time I watched the film, was that you briefly see on the shaman's cloak, you briefly see a double-headed eagle, and it looks so much like a Russian imperial eagle. I'm kind of like, I wonder what the deal is with that. But yeah, so it's just like a Russian imperial like symbol, because almost everybody who's been interested in empire kind of are like fanboys of of the Romans. So like, well, they had eagles, so we want to emulate them, so we're going to have eagles too. Although I don't know that Roman eagles were double-headed, but whatever. Actually, that's something that may be worth mentioning, is that the Russian pre-communist state, the Tsarist regime, like saw itself as the third iteration of Rome. So you had the OG, and then when the Western Empire collapsed, by that point the capital had already moved to Constantinople, but the Byzantines, they continued to call themselves Romans all the way up to when they were conquered by the Ottoman Turks. So they were Rome Mark II, and then as Orthodox Christians who were kind of following in the footsteps of the Eastern Roman Empire based out of Constantinople, they were like, okay, well, we are the third Rome. And there was even like a whole prophecy about it that was very convenient, that turned up. It was just like, yeah, we're the third Rome, so we're super legitimate. And we're going to stick eagles everywhere.
Well, it comes back to, just one sort of final thought. You mentioned orchestral. Well, you mentioned Kes before, and
sure,
that's from orchestral for a knave, which was a saying, and it was something like an eagle for an emperor, orchestral for a knave, a merlin for a lady, and that was some sort of medieval order of who owned what birds.
Oh, that's super interesting. This has been really fun.
Yeah, it's been good to chat and great to watch a cool film and discuss it. And you see so much more when you sort of thinking, I'm going to be talking about this later, so I better pay attention. And it's really quite nice to make notes on a film and then discuss it afterwards. So thank you.
Yeah, it must have taken you back to your Cambridge News days.
Yeah, well, even before that, to my literature and film days.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And that was a lot of how our friendship developed at university. I think I might have said this on the first episode you were on, how like you essentially kind of like snuck me into the literature and film screenings.
Yeah, because we watched all sorts of crazy things.
Yeah, and I seriously think if I hadn't gone along to those, I probably wouldn't be the film nerd that I am now, just because just because it exposed me to older films that were incredible, and at an age where I was just gravitating towards like just stuff that is current is good, and anything that's older than me, why would I care? And it was like, this is why you should care, because it's great, and we're watching the whole thing. So
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm so glad. But yeah, that was fun as well.
So I got the impression that you really liked it, but my big question then is not whether you'd recommend it, but would you recommend this to anybody, or just specifically people with an interest in birds of prey and, the natural world, or would you make it like a broad recommendation?
I think I'd recommend it to, people who are interested in the natural world, and people who I know like a good sort of thoughtful film, a thought-provoking film. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is not like a popcorn munching film, but it is like
no.
it's a great slow burn. I haven't even talked about how gorgeous the visuals are. You've just got these incredible like bleak landscapes, and then the interiors, they remind me almost like of Caravaggio or some Rembrandt paintings.
Wow, that's a really good reference.
With just like the intense contrast.
Yeah, the dramatic light and shade. Yeah, and the warmth of the fire. Yeah.
Yeah, and this glow about it. The cinematographer, whose name I have not written down, just really earned their money. So just visually, it is a treat, and absolutely worth watching for that. Thank you so much for giving me a reason to see it again. It's been a lot of fun. Before you go then, is there anywhere on Tinternet that you would like to direct people towards if they're interested in hearing more from you, Jen?
Oh, well, follow me on Twitter for all sorts of stuff about nature, and it's not all the depressing bird of prey stuff. I don't put that all on my Twitter. But it's at Jenny Shelton Cam from my Cambridge News days. And do check out, if you want to have a bit of an ogle into the whole MP Eagle debacle, it's quite a tasty story. And it's actually lovely to see all the cool people and loads of adorable drawings by children of eagles and birds of prey. And yeah, it's quite a heartwarming thing, which I think is worth checking out if you're interested in that. You'll find that on my Twitter probably, or just Google white-tailed eagle Dorset.
Excellent.
So that's quite an interesting tale. And yeah, I hope it's maybe shone a bit of light on what's sort of happening to birds of prey here and how people feel about them. There's definitely a real two camps, unfortunately, I suppose. Some people really don't like them, but a lot of people really do, and I'd like to think most people really do. And certainly a lot of the lovely messages and drawings that people posted were very heartening and will warm the cockles.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for those recommendations. I would heartily recommend you follow Jenny on social media. As she says, it's not all depressing bird stuff. There's some incredible wildlife photography that's you're basically like my eyes and ears for those sort of issues. I would know nothing about it, as I'm very much like city boy type. So
well, I'm very glad to bring a bit of countryside into your life. Also, actually, I should shout out about Instagram probably, because there's a bit more.
I was hoping you
like
would.
Videos and stuff.
Yeah.
I forgot. I like to do little videos, so there's a few bits on there which might be interesting too.
Definitely. And what's your handle on there?
That is a very good question. What's my name on there? I think it's Jen_H_Shelton.
Great. We'll put it all in the show notes so people don't have to look too
cool.
hard. So.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure to chat to you, Ali.
My pleasure.
And I hope everyone's enjoyed listening.
It's been so much fun. Thank you again for joining us, Jen. Okay, and that's all that we've got time for today. Thanks very much for joining us, and das Vidania, folks.
Das Vidania.
So that's it for this episode, but before I go, I'd like to thank Sasha Ilukovic and the Highly Skilled Migrants for the use of their song Cold in our intro. You can find that song and the rest of their back catalogue on Bandcamp and Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting us by leaving a rating at Apple Podcasts or at podchaser.com. That second one, Podchaser, even lets you rate individual episodes, so if this episode particularly stood out to you, you can let other listeners know that you enjoyed it. Recommending the show on social media is hugely helpful as well. If you can spare a moment or two to do that, it would really make my day. Thank you very much. Speaking of social media, please find us and say hi on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. You can also drop us a line at roosefilsunite@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.